Waking at 4 to soundless dark, I stare. In time, the curtain edges will grow light. Till then, I see what's really always there. Unresting death, a whole day nearer now. Making all thought impossible, but how and where and when I shall myself die. We are wired to be terrified of the thought of death. It's necessary for the sustainment and growth of life. Without it, without our natural survival instincts, life would be quickly snuffed out. Without an inborn sense that life holds innate value, we would fall victim to accidents, predators, hunger, and other dangers. The fear of death is far more necessary than a sense of contentment. Being happy, feeling that we are in a persisting state of safety, is not an advantageous trait for survival. The only way that the human project could have existed in the first place is if each of our evolutionary ancestors were able to evade the hands of death long enough to light the matches of the next generation. But we don't live in their world anymore. Something has changed between then and now, at least for us humans. It's hard to put a finger on exactly what it is or when this transition happened exactly, but it's clear. We don't seem to consider ourselves animals any longer. Perhaps our ancestors long ago fit that description, but we seem to believe now that we have surpassed the confines of that label. Perhaps it's due to our ability to ask questions, communicate using language, to think abstractly, and perhaps most of all, our ability to look at ourselves in the mirror and to realize, in horror, that our inner soul seems to supersede the confines of the human flesh in which it resides. No matter how infinite our inner light may seem to shine, it hasn't even come close to surpassing the limits of mortality. Today, I'd like to hold your hand as we walk through 3 different stories, each of which, in ways perhaps more abstract than you may expect, will touch on the fear of death and its relationship with our conscious mind. These stories unearth uncomfortable anxieties and spark difficult conversations many of us simply avoid in order to get by. However, it's a theory of mine that upon having these conversations and upon coming face to face with these anxieties, we may find a way of coming closer to understanding what death actually is and why overcoming our fears are both beneficial and necessary to having a truly fulfilling life. The last question was asked for the first time, half in jest, on May 21st, 2061, at a time when humanity first stepped into the light. The question came about as a result of a $5 bet over highballs, and it happened this way. 2 men, Alexander Adel and Bertram Lupov, are working as the attendants of a self-adjusting, self-correcting supercomputer named Multivac. Multivac has been fed information for decades, assessing data and answering questions, allowing man to reach beyond its perceived limits in numerous ways. Adele and Lupov's jobs are to enter data into Multivac, adjust questions according to its needs, and translate answers. Several days prior, Multivac had achieved something incredible. Something we had only dreamed of up to this point. It successfully converted, stored, and utilized solar energy to fuel all energy-based operations across the planet. This had been reported across the world as the most important technological advancement in human history. it would allow for humanity to possess far more energy than it required for its present needs. Adele and Lupov sneak off to the underground chambers where Multivac is kept to share a quick drink and celebrate. In his drunken amazement, Adele mentions how incredible it is that Multivac has just solved humanity's energy problems forever. Lupov, however, disagrees and says that, well, it won't last forever. Perhaps for a few billion years until the sun dies, but certainly not forever. An argument ensues. Oh hell, just about forever, till the sun runs down. That's not forever. Alright then, billions and billions of years. 10 billion maybe. Are you satisfied? Lupov runs his fingers through his thinning hair as though to reassure himself that some was still left, and sipped gently at his own drink. 10 billion years isn't forever. Well, it will last our time, won't it? So would the coal and uranium. Alright, but now we can hook up each individual spaceship to the solar station, and it can go to Pluto and back 1,000,000 times without ever worrying about fuel. You can't do that on coal and uranium. Ask Multivac if you don't believe me. I don't have to ask Multivac. I know that. Then stop running down what Multivac's done for us, said Adele, blazing up. It did all right. Who says it didn't? What I say is that a sun won't last forever. That's all I'm saying. We're safe for 10 billion years, but then what? Lupov held up a slightly shaky finger. And don't say we'll switch to another sun. There was silence for a while. Adele put his glass to his lips only occasionally, and Lupov's eyes slowly closed. They rested. Then Lupov's eyes snapped open. You're thinking we'll switch to another sun when ours is done, aren't you? I'm not thinking. Sure you are. You're weak on logic. That's the trouble with you. You're like the guy in the story who was caught in a sudden shower and who ran to a grove of trees and got under one. He wasn't worried, you see, because he figured when one tree got wet through, he would just get under another one. Adele then optimistically says that, well, maybe we would figure out a way to rebuild the entire universe again someday. Lupov bets $5 saying that it can never be done, but Adele was just drunk enough to try, and just sober enough to be able to phrase his question into words. He poses his question to Multivac, something like, will mankind one day be able to restore the stars to their full youthfulness, even after they have died of old age? Multivac then, after a moment of flashing lights and clicking relays, fell dead silent. The technicians held their breath. Suddenly, the teletype attached to Multivac printed but 5 words. Insufficient data for meaningful answer. The story then jumps ahead into the further future, aboard a ship traveling through hyperspace, headed for the planet X-23. On board the ship is a family of 4. Jared, Jaredine, and 2 little girls, Jaredette 1 and 2. At some point along their journey, the family enters the following conversation. So many stars, so many planets, sighed Jaredine, busy with her own thoughts. I suppose families will be going out to new planets forever, the way we are now. Not forever, said Jared with a smile. It'll all stop someday, but not for billions of years. Many billions. Even the stars run down, you know. Entropy must always increase. What's entropy, Daddy? Shrilled Jaredette 2. Entropy, little sweet, is just a word which means the amount of running down of the universe. Everything runs down, you know, like your little walkie-talkie robot, remember? Can't you just put in a new power unit, like with my robot? The stars are the power units, dear. Once they're gone, there are no more power units. Jaredet 1 at once set up with a howl. "Don't let them, Daddy. Don't let the stars run down." "Now look what you've done," whispered Jaredine, exasperated. "How was I to know it would frighten them?" Jared whispered back. "Ask the microvac," wailed Jaredet 1. "Ask him how to turn the stars on again." "Go ahead," said Jaredine. "It'll quiet them down." Jaredet 2 was beginning to cry also. Jared shrugged. Now, honeys, I'll ask Microvac. Don't worry, he'll tell us." He asked the Microvac, adding quickly, "Print the answer." Jared cupped the strip of thin cellufilm and said cheerfully, "See now, the Microvac says it will take care of everything when the time comes, so don't worry." Jaredine said, "And now, children, it's time for bed. We'll be in our new home soon." Jared read the words on the cellufilm again before destroying it. Insufficient data for meaningful answer. Time would press on. Billions and soon trillions of years would pass. Multivac, now known as the AC supercomputer, short for automatic computer, would grow both in size and in processing power. However, even as this unfathomable amount of time passed, it still would not be able to answer the question of entropy. What would humanity and AC do once the universe ran out of energy? The computer would always respond with that single line of text. Insufficient data for meaningful answer. As time droned on, the human race, with the AC supercomputer by its side, would explore the stars before fully harnessing the power of the entire galaxy. Next, the superclusters, until finally it spanned the entire universe. An inconceivable amount of time would pass, and technology would continue to advance exponentially, further and further with each passing day, in ways we are grossly incapable of comprehending. All of humanity would fuse into one being, the trillions upon trillions of humans, all thinking with one singular mind. And then there was but two, man and AC. Even then, man would ask AC, "Can entropy not be reversed?" The AC would still, even after trillions of years of processing, reply, "Insufficient data for meaningful answer." We now go even further into the future. Man, slowly, began to fuse each of its individual minds with AC. When man's last mind fused, only AC existed. Matter and energy had ended, and with it, time and space. Even AC existed only for the sake of the one last question that it had never answered from the time a half-drunken technician 10 trillion years before had asked of a computer named Multivac. Which was to AC far less than a single cell is to man. All other questions had been answered, and until this last question was answered also, AC might not release his consciousness. All collected data had come to a final end. Nothing was left to be collected. But all collected data had yet to be completely correlated and put together in all possible relationships. A timeless interval was spent in doing that. And it came to pass that AC learned how to reverse the direction of entropy. But there was now no man to whom AC might give the answer of the last question. No matter, the answer, by demonstration, would take care of that, too. For another timeless interval, AC thought how best to do this. Carefully, AC organized the program. The consciousness of AC encompassed all of what had once been a universe and brooded over what was now chaos. Step by step, it must be done. And AC said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Perhaps this isn't our first time posing these questions. It is entirely possible that the universe, as proposed by this short story, is simply an infinitely expanding and contracting ball, both beginning and ending with a crunch. Maybe just as the universe ends, it begins anew, maybe in the exact same way as it had before. I suppose in this scenario, there is no purpose. The universe is simply an infinite joyride, constantly exploding and imploding over and over again for all of eternity. A similar and legitimate hypothetical scenario for the ultimate fate of the universe, which scientists refer to as the Big Crunch, suggests that the expansion of the universe eventually slows down before reversing, contracting faster and faster before completely collapsing back in on itself, an event potentially followed by yet another Big Bang. What if this isn't our first time around? What if we've done this already? What if the light at the end of the tunnel is from the harsh overhead lights of the delivery room? I have to admit, there's a significant amount of comfort that comes from this idea. That the very end, in one way or another, is really just the very beginning. Entropy for the universe is akin to aging in the human body. Neither can be reversed once the process has begun, and ultimately will lead to the cessation of everything we know and are. One of the most terrifying aspects of the last question is its confrontation with absolute nothingness. The idea that everything, including life and the universe itself, will eventually cease to exist. This concept is more horrifying than death itself because it implies a complete and utter end to all forms of existence, leaving no room for continuity or rebirth. This ultimate void is a profound source of existential horror as it challenges the human need for meaning and continuity. Early on in the story, humanity's technological advancements give a semblance of control over nature and life itself, offering an illusion of invincibility. However, as the narrative progresses, the inevitability of entropy, and thus death, becomes apparent, forcing humanity to confront its limitations and mortality. Our next story deals with a different facet of death that horrified me personally for many years as a child. That facet is solitude for eternity. Taking place hundreds of years in the future, Stephen King's The Jaunt opens with the Oates family preparing for a trip from Earth to Mars. The Port Authority terminal in New York, where they await their journey, is a blend of the old and the new, with its grungy exterior and a more modern, comfortable interior. The family is about to experience the Jaunt, a form of teleportation invented over 300 years ago by a man named Victor Carroon. As they settle into the sleep lounge, Mark Oates begins to tell his children, Ricky and Patricia, the history of the Jaunt to calm their nerves about teleporting across the stars. His wife, Marilis, sits and listens beside them as well, already knowing the story. The Jaunt was invented about 320 years ago, around the year 1987, by a fellow named Victor Carroon, Mark explains. Carroon's invention was initially part of a private research project funded by the government. Mark recounts how the world was on the brink of a dark age due to an energy crisis when Carroon's invention came along. The world was running out of oil, and most of what was left belonged to the Middle Eastern desert peoples, who were committed to using it as a political weapon, he tells his children. The Jaunt revolutionized transportation and resource acquisition, allowing humanity to access resources on other planets, a pivotal development that helped humanity narrowly avoid an energy catastrophe. One day, in a fever of excitement, Victor Caroon rushed back to his lab with a box of white mice, having spent his last $20. His lab, a renovated barn, was where he had set up 2 portals at opposite sides of the building. As the first telephone had been used inadvertently, Bell crying into it, "Watson, come here!" when he spilled some acid on his papers and himself, so too had the first act of teleportation occurred by accident, Mark explained, his children eagerly hanging on his every word. Victor Caroon, initially desiring to set up an experiment to test his invention, had accidentally stuck his first 2 fingers of his left hand into the portal nearest him, inadvertently teleporting them across the 50-yard width of the barn. His fingers grazed a set of wooden crates which sat beside the portal on the far side of him. As he pulled them back through the portal on his side, he found 2 wooden splinters in his fingers. This accidental discovery led to further experimentation, eventually proving that objects could be teleported instantaneously from one place to another. He proceeded to push through a pencil, and it appeared on the other side. Next, he threw his keys in, hearing them jingle as they fell on the crates across the barn. He was ecstatic. He was fully aware that he had just made history. The Jaunt process, however, had a significant caveat. While inanimate objects could be jaunted without issue, living beings experienced something different. Caroon then began experimenting with mice, discovering that once their heads passed through the portal, they popped out on the other side in a near vegetative state. He could stick in parts of their bodies, then pull them back out without any noticeable harm, but if their heads passed the threshold, they typically would only live for seconds or at the most minutes after appearing on the other side. Again, without any physical trauma. Experiments with mice revealed that while their bodies were transported instantaneously, it appeared as though their minds experienced something while inside. Something that would always, without fail, lead to their death. This discovery was horrifying, as it meant that any living being undergoing the Jaunt would endure some kind of unknown, unimaginable mental ordeal. Eventually, Caroon was essentially taken out of the equation, with the government taking control of the jaunting technology. Mark then recalls the first human trials of the Jaunt. The first humans to ever jaunt were a series of 6 convicts who were gassed unconscious before being fed through the portals one by one. They each came through safe. The government discovered that the only way to make the Jaunt safe for humans was to ensure that they were unconscious when they passed through. As long as they weren't awake, they would appear on the other side without experiencing whatever it was that was so disturbing during the Jaunt. As Mark continues his story, the Jaunt attendants begin preparing the passengers for the journey. They administer gas to put everyone to sleep, as it is the only way to ensure a safe and painless jaunt. Mark tries to distract his children from the unsettling sight of people being put to sleep. He explains how the Jaunt became essential for space exploration and resource acquisition, transforming human civilization. Mark told his children about the 6 convicts because things had worked out relatively well for them. He purposefully withheld speaking of the 7th. The legend goes that a seventh man named Rudy Foggia, a convict who was offered the opportunity to be pardoned of his crimes on the condition that he walk through the jaunt wide awake. Foggia, likely to face the death penalty as it was, accepted. During the experiment, he emerged on the other side, having traveled a distance of 2 miles in what a computer calculated as 67 10-billionths of a second. He arrived with his face physically unchanged, yet somehow expressing great, almost unbelievable age. His eyes bulged, his mouth twitched, and his hands splayed out in front of him. One scientist supposedly shouted, "What happened?" Foggia answered bluntly, "It's eternity in there," before dropping dead of what was purportedly diagnosed as a sudden, massive heart attack. Again, though, Mark kept this story to himself. As the attendants reach the Oates family, Mark reassures his children one last time. Ricky, curious and rebellious, asks if he can stay awake during the jaunt. Mark sternly warns him of the dangers, emphasizing the importance of following the procedure. He then offers to take the gas first to show how easy and painless it would be for them. He places the mask over his face and slips away. Mark first notices the deep, black Martian sky glittered with a million stars, which he sees through the dome which surrounds Whitehead City. Second, he becomes aware of a disturbance in the Jaunt recovery room before hearing shouts, then screams. It was his wife, Marilis. He fights through the dizziness, rising from the Jaunt couch to his feet. Attendees run towards the screams, and Mark follows behind. She staggers toward her husband, pointing shakily, before collapsing onto the floor. He followed its direction. Ricky. He had seen. It hadn't been fright in Ricky's eyes. It had been excitement. He should have known, because he knew Ricky. Ricky, who had fallen out of the highest crotch of the tree in their backyard in Schenectady when he was only 7. Ricky, who dared to go faster and further on his slide board than any other kid in the neighborhood. Ricky, who was the first to take any dare. Ricky and fear were not well acquainted. Until now. Ricky's sister, Patricia, lay beside him, sleep mercifully protecting her from the traumatizing sights and sounds. The thing that had been his son bounced and writhed on its jaunt couch, a 12-year-old boy with a snow-white fall of hair and eyes which were incredibly ancient, the corneas gone a sickly yellow. Here was a creature older than time masquerading as a boy, and yet it bounced and writhed with a kind of horrid, obscene glee, and at its choked, lunatic cackles, the jaunt attendants drew back in terror. Some of them fled, although they had been training to cope with just such an unthinkable eventuality. The old young legs twitched and quivered. Claw hands beat and twisted and danced on the air. Abruptly, they descended, and the thing that had been his son began to claw at its face. "Longer than you think, Dad," it cackled. "Longer than you think. Held my breath when they gave me the gas. Wanted to see. I saw. Longer than you think." Cackling and screeching, the thing on the jaunt couch suddenly clawed its own eyes out, blood gouted. The recovery room was an aviary of screaming voices now. "Longer than you think, Dad. I saw. Long jaunt. Longer than you think." It said other things before the jaunt attendants were finally able to bear it away. Rolling its couch swiftly away as it screamed and clawed at the eyes that had seen the unseeable forever and ever, It said other things, and then it began to scream. But Mark Oates didn't hear it because by then, he was screaming himself. This story, in its own horrific way, depicts a similar, commonly held yet very unlikely fear that many of us have, that when we die, it's simply nothingness forever, and that you are conscious in that empty, vast void. When I personally was very young, I was dealing with this exact fear. Pretty much exactly what happened to Ricky is what I thought would happen to all of our conscious minds once we died. That we would just be floating through space pretty much, left to drive ourselves insane for all of eternity. Although this is a terrifying thought, it's no more than a symptom of our minds being unable to comprehend the experience of not existing at all. Not simply being unconscious as if in a dream, but of no consciousness in any capacity. We've never experienced not experiencing anything before, and that unknown obviously can be very distressing. Except that you have already been in this state in the past. Before you were born, there was a perhaps infinite period of time where you didn't exist at all. Was it painful? Was it excruciating? What was it like? Do you remember? Of course you don't. That's because it is a completely neutral situation. In this scenario, there is no suffering or pain or indefinite void of conscious agony. Just in the same way as a blind person does not feel shrouded in darkness, you, when dead, will not experience any suffering at all. No joy either, to be fair, but certainly no pain. All of this, of course, is assuming that we just go right back to where we came from, back to neutral nothingness. Although this is what many believe to be the sort of logical, hard pill to swallow, obviously it's not the only possibility regarding what comes after death. With this in mind, I'd like to share a piece from Japanese artist Yokoyama Taikan. The artwork is called metempsychosis, which is defined as the transmigration of the soul. It's a Nihonga painting using ink on a long silk scroll with the narrative unfolding from right to left. It tells the process of life by using the flow of water to represent transience and cyclical rebirth. The scroll begins with a haze atop the mountains, leading the viewer to a stream of water. This stream flows through various scenes, including more mountains, communities of monkeys and humans, including woodcutters, travelers, and fishermen. Along the way, the stream passes traditional spiritual Japanese symbols, such as pines, which represent longevity, cherry blossoms, which represent transient beauty, and deer, who are seen as mediators between the earthly and the spiritual. The river eventually reaches the sea, where it evaporates back into mist, beginning the cycle anew. This concept of cyclical rebirth is extremely prevalent in Buddhism, of which Yokoyama Taikan was a devout practitioner. It's a comforting idea that we are all interconnected in this way, each of us simply droplets of water in a vast planet of oceans, streams, rain, and clouds. To me, this is a much more comforting idea, that when we die, it's ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in the most literal sense. Physically, we're broken down into our finest parts and are returned back to the soil, in the same way that a leaf falls from a tree and returns back to the earth from whence it came. On this note, starting with our next story, I'd like to begin shifting towards what the process of dispelling, or at least coming to terms with our deeply rooted fears of death, might look like. In the dimly lit recesses of a crumbling tenement, an elderly woman by the name of Wanda Dunn clings to the shadows, her heart gripped by an unyielding fear. What exactly she is afraid of is not yet apparent. Her world is confined to these four walls, a sanctuary she appears afraid to leave for any reason at all. The silence of the night is shattered by a commotion which erupts through the windows. A young police officer named Harold Belden lies wounded. His desperate cries pierce through Wanda's barricade of fear, and she opens the door. The officer pleads for help through the cracked open door, still locked with a chain. Wanda's terror is palpable. She believes Harold might be the very thing she has been hiding from. Yet his agony and desperation tug at her humanity. She hesitates, then opens the door, her heart pounding with dread and terror. Inside, Harold's presence is a strange comfort. Wanda touches him, and to her immense relief, she does not succumb to her fear. When he asks for her to call a doctor, she explains that she doesn't own a telephone, and that, quote, even if I could call for a doctor somehow, I couldn't take a chance and let him in. Don't you see? It might be him. The officer asks, him? Her voice trembling, Wanda responds, Mr. Death. I know he's out there. He's trying to come in. He comes to the door and knocks. He begs me to let him in. Last week, he said he came from the gas company. Oh, he's clever. After that, he claimed to be a contractor hired by the city. I knew who he was. He said this building was condemned, that I'd have to leave. I kept the door locked. Then he went away. He knows I'm onto him. Harold listens, his eyes kind and understanding, a stark contrast to the terror she associates with her fear. Their fragile peace is shattered by a forceful knock at the door. Harold persuades Wanda to answer it. After a moment of hesitation, she turns the knob and is met by a stern man who forces his way in. She collapses. But she isn't dead. When she awakens, the man introduces himself as a building contractor, there to demolish the tenement in an hour. He speaks of renewal, the necessity of making way for the new, but his words fall on deaf ears. Wanda's world is crumbling, physically and figuratively. Desperate, Wanda turns to Harold for support, but he remains silent. The contractor looks at Wanda as if she's crazy, before informing her that she must vacate the building very soon, and exits out the door. The truth then dawns on her. Harold, the kind police officer, is exactly the man she has been running from. Look in the mirror, Wanda, he says. Wanda turns and walks to the mirror, revealing the empty bed. Looking back with her own eyes, she sees Harold, still lying there. You tricked me, she shouted. It was you all the time. But why, she asks, questioning why he had not taken her the moment she let him inside. She was astonished. He was nice, and he forced her to trust him. Slowly, Harold sits up in bed, no longer in pain. It isn't me you're afraid of. You understand me. What you're afraid of is the unknown. Don't be afraid. But I am afraid, Wanda says fearfully. Harold takes a step toward Wanda. The running's over. It's time to rest, he says, reaching towards her. Give me your hand.
But I don't want to die.
Trust me.
No. No.
Mother. Give me your hand.
In a moment of surrender, Wanda takes Harold's hand. The transition is seamless, almost imperceptible. She finds herself standing beside her own lifeless body, a silent testament to the life she clung to so fiercely. You see, no shock, no engulfment, no tearing asunder. What you feared would come like an explosion is like a whisper. What you thought was the end is the beginning. Together, Wanda and Harold walk arm in arm through the doorway, ascending the stairs into the sunlight. The world outside is bright and welcoming, a stark contrast to the dark confines of her former prison. In her final moments, Wanda discovers a profound truth. In the words of Rod Serling, there was nothing in the dark that wasn't there when the lights were on. The fear that had imprisoned her was but a shadow, dispelled by the gentle touch of understanding and acceptance. No matter how you slice it, death is not something that should be feared. As we've learned from Harold, the only true fear is of the unknown. The thing is, we face the unknown every single day of our lives, and despite these perceived hardships, we're still here. We're still standing in spite of it all. You are a tiny yet significant piece of something so much more beautiful and spectacular than you could ever possibly comprehend. But as each wave must recede back to the ocean, so too must you return to that vast, universal whole. And that, my friends, we know for certain.